The gravest threat to organizational stability and societal well-being doesn't emerge from transparently corrupt leaders who consciously exploit their authority for selfish purposes. Rather, the most destructive force originates from those occupying positions of power who maintain unwavering faith in their righteousness, executing disastrous policies while preserving complete confidence in their ethical superiority. These authority figures don't deliberately deceive their constituents. They've mastered the art of self-delusion so thoroughly that objective reality becomes subordinate to their perceived virtuous mission. Historical evidence demonstrates this hazardous pattern repeatedly across civilizations. Emperor Nero initially ascended to power as Rome's celebrated prodigy, an intellectually sophisticated and aesthetically minded ruler who enacted progressive policies including tax relief and enhanced civic freedoms. However, this same individual eventually orchestrated his mother's assassination, murdered his expectant wife, and reportedly performed musical compositions while the capital city burned. Contemporary chroniclers portrayed a figure so convinced of his supernatural brilliance that he interpreted criticism as attacks against artistic expression itself, perceiving dissent as blasphemy against divine will. This metamorphosis from competent administrator to tyrannical despot follows recognizable psychological trajectories that transcend specific historical contexts. Howard Hughes exemplifies this progression in contemporary times, initially establishing himself as an innovative aviator and entertainment industry pioneer who exercised significant commercial and political leverage. Nevertheless, his achievements gradually devolved into pathological isolation so comprehensive that he became persuaded that invisible adversaries were orchestrating schemes against him. His paranoid delusions didn't merely devastate his personal business empire. They created financial chaos for thousands of workers and stakeholders because one individual's warped worldview became the operational philosophy of vast corporate enterprises. Scientific investigation by social psychologist Cameron Anderson demonstrates that individuals wielding authority consistently inflate their personal expertise and capabilities while simultaneously developing blindness to their own deficiencies. This phenomenon extends beyond simple narcissism or hubris. It represents a measurable psychological condition where power fundamentally alters the brain's mechanisms for realistic self-evaluation. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Renaissance political analyst, recognized this lethal sequence with extraordinary precision over 500 years ago. His composition of The Prince in 1513 wasn't intended as a handbook for despots, but rather as documentation of the psychological evolution that converts competent administrators into hazardous autocrats. His observations regarding the mental frameworks that inevitably compromise judgment have received confirmation through contemporary neuroscience with troubling precision. Machiavelli's revelation that all men see what you seem to be, only a few know what you are, identified a crucial psychological snare embedded within power structures. Authority establishes an unbalanced relationship with truth, where leaders primarily encounter themselves through carefully managed public displays rather than genuine human connection. Most individuals experience leaders exclusively in situations where they're demonstrating competence, delivering speeches, executing decisions, projecting confidence, while seldom witnessing their private uncertainties, fears, or mistakes. This imbalance generates a harmful cycle through what psychologists currently recognize as social validation distortion. Gradually, leaders begin internalizing the successful, authoritative version of themselves that others consistently observe, progressively losing touch with their own doubts and constraints. The process operates through systematic rationalization at institutional scale, where powerful individuals can deploy their resources to create supportive evidence that confirms their preferred self-perception. Unlike average people who must regularly confront contradictory information in their everyday experiences, influential leaders can employ advisors who validate their preconceptions, finance studies that endorse their favored interpretations, and cultivate media relationships that reframe their setbacks as strategic victories. This methodology feels completely logical from their perspective because they're not intentionally pursuing misleading information. They're consulting qualified professionals who comprehend the circumstances better than the critics and doubters who question their wisdom. Neurological research exposes the physiological aspects of this transformation. Brain imaging reveals that exercising authority decreases activity in neural networks governing empathy and social awareness. Power literally diminishes leaders' capacity for understanding others' thoughts and emotions, including their authentic perceptions of the leader's effectiveness. This neurological modification isn't temporary. It constitutes a fundamental restructuring of cognitive functions that develops through consistent authority exercise. The Enron leadership demonstrates this psychological deterioration in practice. Following years of acclaim as innovators and treatment as intellectual giants, they genuinely believed their deceptive financial practices constituted legitimate business advancement. They weren't merely misleading shareholders. They had authentically convinced themselves. Eventually, they viewed critics not as truth seekers but as obstacles to progress who couldn't grasp their sophisticated corporate strategies. This behavioral model represents the core pathology behind every significant leadership catastrophe. Power systematically eliminates the corrective mechanisms that maintain ordinary thinking patterns connected to reality, and without those connections, even superior intelligence gravitates toward hazardous self-deception. The most visible symptom manifests in staffing choices, where competent leaders actively recruit advisors who challenge their assumptions, while delusional leaders systematically surround themselves with individuals who provide validation and admiration. This evolution occurs gradually and frequently unconsciously as psychological pressure to preserve self-image exceeds commitment to accurate information. This transformation accelerates due to what researchers term the inverted Dunning-Kruger phenomenon, where individuals who have accomplished authentic success in one field become overconfident regarding their competence in entirely different disciplines. An exceptional technology innovator begins believing they comprehend municipal planning. A prosperous financier presumes they can transform educational systems. A talented performer assumes they understand sophisticated policy matters. When leaders believe their achievements in one area demonstrate universal superiority, opposition seems like ignorance rather than valid perspective. Consultants who challenge their reasoning appear to misunderstand their extraordinary abilities, resulting in team composition based on acknowledgement of the leader's brilliance rather than independent knowledge or commitment to honest counsel. Contemporary technology has exponentially magnified these psychological vulnerabilities. Modern powerful individuals can establish comprehensive information ecosystems engineered to confirm their perspectives, financing academic institutions that generate supportive research, backing media companies that present every development favorably, and implementing digital campaigns that amplify agreeable voices while suppressing dissenting opinions. However, mechanisms designed to persuade others ultimately convince their architects, as leaders lose capability to differentiate between authentic approval and artificially generated agreement. The most successful historical protections involved leaders who embedded opposition before they lost tolerance for it. Abraham Lincoln's rival cabinet approach and Franklin D. Roosevelt's organized conflict methodology both intentionally maintained access to challenging perspectives by surrounding themselves with individuals who preserved independent authority bases and were actively encouraged to express disagreement. Comprehending these psychological dynamics carries significant implications for institutional design and leadership development. The resolution isn't eliminating power but approaching it as an inherently dangerous activity requiring continuous oversight, comparable to aviation safety protocols. We require institutions that maintain reality connection despite leadership resistance, organizational cultures that celebrate intellectual modesty over arrogant certainty, an acknowledgement that preventing leadership delusion represents a collective responsibility extending beyond the leaders themselves. The cost of competent leadership, like liberty itself, demands perpetual alertness against internal psychological pressures that convert guardians into oppressors and public servants into authoritarian masters.